Hello, this is Taha.
This is Anaina.
This is Movie Masala.
And we're here to yap at you about films we watched recently.
And today we're doing
Heartstopper Forever
and Avatar Aang, The Last Airbender.
So we've chosen quite similar-ish
movies, like I said. Yeah, in the way that mine is also a film that is bookending a TV show. And so is yours.
Yeah, exactly. Except Heartstopper, the series, is based off of comics.
While Avatar, The Last Airbender has comics that continue the story of the show. And also the fact that this film is 18 years after the original series concluded.
Oh, wow. Okay, so no, I'm going to start. So Heartstopper Forever, directed by Wash Westmoreland.
A lot to say.
Yeah.
For 2-year-olds, and I'll be a famous historian, and we'll have a flat with a river view.
You better sell a lot of books, because I don't think I'm earning much as a coach for toddlers.
Then we'll go to the gay club, and then we'll come home, we'll have sex, and then in the morning, you can make us pancakes.
Well, I like this plan.
Takes off almost immediately from where the last episode of the last season, which is the third one, ends. And we're in the same time frame and mind zone for these two characters. Nick, played by Kit Connor, and Charlie, played by Joe Locke.
You will need to tell me what happens at the end of the third season. Someone who's not watched this. I'm so sorry. Just give me a quick rundown.
Yeah. So basically the series is about Nick and Charlie and their group of friends. The first season is about Nick realizing he is queer and bisexual and then dating Charlie, and then Charlie having to navigate with the bullying he faced when he was outed as gay, and then also with keeping this relationship with Nick secret, so trying to protect Nick from the kind of bullying. The second season is about them figuring out how to continue being a couple, but, also dealing with this whole question of coming out. And then towards the end of it, it becomes a lot about Charlie's mental health issues. And then the third season is primarily focused on Charlie's mental health issues, which include an eating disorder, etc., which is because of the kind of severe bullying he faced, etc., etc. And it kind of ends on the note of Charlie is recovering and their relationship is great, but Nick is starting to lose himself a little because all he sees himself as is Charlie's boyfriend. And the movie mainly deals with that then, with the fact that it's kind of shown that Charlie is healed now, obviously. And it keeps going back to the fact that he has bad days, obviously. You aren't fully healed from a mental health issue or an eating disorder.
It leaves a scar in some evident ways. Yeah.
And it keeps recurring as well.
Okay.
But the film mainly focuses on Nick and Nick's depression and lack of self-knowledge as he applies to university, and how that puts a strain on their relationship, because Charlie can see that Nick is kind of struggling, but Nick refuses to admit it, and so they have so many communication mishaps, which I had to keep reminding myself throughout the film. These are teenagers. They are 17 and 16. These are teenagers. They are 17 and 16. No 16 and 17-year-olds know how to communicate properly.
Yeah. I think it's those places where you're these characters should feel frustrating because this is how relationships at that age feel like, versus this is just frustrating because we keep circling back to the same thing, which is with a problem from the start.
Exactly. And I think that's what Heartstopper has always been good at, is portraying these semi-realistic couples or characters on screen. And that works really well because the books reflect that really well. So the comics are written by Alice Oseman, and they're a writer on the movie, and they're also a creator and writer on the show.
Okay.
So the creative vision of the comics, as well as the characterization, gets very well translated onto the screen.
Good.
Exactly. And because the characters are created by Alice Oseman from such a place of care for telling queer stories and telling realistic but still, hopeful queer stories, that it kind of...
Which is lovely to see.
Exactly, yeah. So I think Heartstopper has always been, and this film included, this really good balance and representation for teenagers, queer young people especially. While it's cringy, it is really, really cringy. I have always enjoyed the cringe because it's het couples get to be cringy all the time. Queer couples Queer couples don't. I feel like there's a lot of judgment put on queer couples who are really romantic or like really cringy or do really sappy things, and it's like it's too mainstream is I think a lot of the criticism that's leveled at stuff like Heartstopper and Heartstopper included.
I very much understand where you're coming from, because then it forces any piece of queer media to be made to be like, you have to be elevated in so many ways, which is just not okay. Because I think a lot of where this criticisms come from, not all of where this criticism comes from and everything, but it's from online spaces. People who have interacted with this media quite a lot. And I'm like, you need to remember that for some people, being mainstream helps because it gets more people access to this who should see it. It's fine for like normal, quote unquote, like cis straight audiences to watch something like this because it is so mainstream. So it gets them, and that is good representation, good media, and that helps.
Exactly. And the amazing thing I think about Heartstopper is that even in its representation of queerness, because a lot of like queer representation gets stuck in the cis white gay realm, right? So
Yeah.
the fact that Nick repeatedly asserts that he is bisexual is very
Mhm.
important. The fact that there is Arrow Ace representation with one of the characters, Isaac, who is played by Toby Donovan, is really important. There is lesbian representation as well, and interracial lesbian representation. And for one of the characters, Darcy, who's played by Kizzy Edgell, they have a journey with their gender expression where they start out in the series as like a cis woman, but by the end in this movie, they are fully owning their identity after being disowned by their mom as like non-binary sapphic person. And then, of course, you have...
That's amazing.
Exactly. And then, of course, you have Yasmin Finney as Elle, who is a trans woman. And in this movie, I think it's her character mirrors a lot. So the world of Heartstopper kind of exists like parallel to our world. But Alice Oseman does a wonderful job of bringing the horrific way with which trans people are treated in the UK into this world and have Elle fight against that. And it's not just Elle fighting against that, it's her friends supporting her friends showing up for her. So there's this kind of like underlying message of also like queer people need to support each other at every single level and every single instance. And there's so much representation of not just queer people and queer characters, but of queer solidarities.
There's no LGB without the T.
There's no LGB without the T. So I think it's always done a great job of that, and this movie kind of carries it forward. I think what something new it does is like it shows Charlie as head boy of the school, and
fancy.
the main,
I just think of head boy and just imagine schools being posh, even though that's not
it's a
necessarily
grammar school. It's a
true.
grammar school. Yeah. And he kind of runs on this platform of, I was bullied for being gay and different. And I want to end bullying for everyone. And it's an all boys school. And he works really hard to build a community for all the queer young boys and men in this school to kind of come together and have a safe space so they're not as isolated. And his teacher, Mr. Ajayi, who's played by Fisayo Akinade, who's always supported Charlie from the beginning, supports him even now as he kind of tries to get this kind of community going. And this is really wonderful moment where Charlie's complaining that he hasn't been given permission by the school principal to start like a LGBTQ support club. But Mr. Rajai kind of goes, historically, us queers have never been that good at asking for permission.
Yeah, love that.
It's a really, really lovely, heartwarming moment. I remember like crying when I watched those scenes because I think about the fact that, you know, this is something I think every queer person in school would have wanted. Right. I don't know any queer person. Yeah. I don't think anyone wouldn't have wanted that kind of an environment and that kind of an experience, especially in same-sex schools.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Like the idea of having community, having that place to feel yourself does so much, especially at that age, can genuinely be so vital and incredibly like useful in so many ways.
Exactly, yeah. So I think it does a fantastic job at all of that.
I sense, however,
the plot of the movie itself, it's predictable. It follows any kind of rom-com that is like whatever. Third act breakup, then they get back together. There's an end montage sequence, like an epilogue where, we see where these people have all ended up and what they're doing and blah, blah, blah. So it's pretty standard plot, but plot uniqueness has never been something that Heartstopper is known for.
Yeah, we did talk about it being a bit mainstream before anyway. So
Exactly.
Sense.
Yeah. I think what it's always done well and continues to do well in this movie is these representations that I've talked about and these kind of characters and how these characters interact with each other and what it means for young queer people, because it is fully focused towards younger queer audiences.
Yeah.
However, this movie does have a lot more sex and explorations of teenage sex and queer teenage sex. So I would say that this film is for slightly older audiences, like I would say 15, 16 plus.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But that's also really interesting to see, is because we don't see like a full sex scene, because that's just no.
Also, like depicting like 16-year-olds, that would put it in a place where
Exactly. We put it in a slightly questionable place. But even the sex scenes that are there are really tender and really soft, especially between Nick and Charlie, which is so important, because I think
it establishes from a romantic perspective.
Exactly. Yeah. And there is so much talk about consent. There are literally 3-4 times where the literal dialogues, "Can we have sex?" is said. Which is so rare. Important. And also, it's so rare to see people actually talking about having sex before having sex, because usually it's kind of depicted as we both knew it was the moment.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It just happens.
Right. So
you throw someone against a wall and it just happens.
Exactly. So a lot of the times when you have it just happened, consent also becomes blurry, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it does that really well. So I wouldn't say teenagers shouldn't watch it. I would say they should, because it's a good representation of how sex should work, especially when you're that young.
Fair enough. That's good.
Yeah. And so, I thought the movie was generally very cute. A good ending to the show.
Yeah, I think with the good ending thing, because the whole time we've been talking about, I've been thinking about another show, British-ish, that is a lot about sexuality, queerness, and discovering those things at an early age. That is Sex Education.
Yes.
A show that started off very strong and really fell in its last season spectacularly.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy to know that this did not stumble the landing.
It's consistent throughout. Heartstopper has had drops in viewership and stuff, but I don't think they're for reasons to do with quality.
Got it.
Right. I think it's to do with the change in the ages of the viewers that kind of makes them go, this is not for me anymore. But that's not true. It's just not true. Which is fair enough if you think it's not for you anymore, though.
Yeah.
But so I think, according to me, the quality has remained quite consistent, and it remains consistent for this film as well. And it's a great way to finish the story, because you get a neat ending, which everybody loves a neat ending. And it corresponds with the completion of the comic books as well. So I think all in all, it comes to a good draw. And I think everyone's been doing this for a while. So there is no question about them having done a good job. They do a good job. They consistently have done a good job. I think for me, it's just Alice Oseman and their kind of involvement and vision of this that is, to me, what kind of keeps this...
Pushes it home.
Exactly, pushes it home. And the kind of backing up by all these other forces, like the actors and the director, and as much as I hate to say it, Netflix, which stuck by them for all 3 seasons plus the movie.
Yeah, that's rare. That is very rare nowadays.
So,
Okay, and now to talk about another film that is following up from a TV series just a bit later, which is Avatar Aang, The Last Airbender, directed by Lauren Montgomery.
Tara, I'm sorry to leave so suddenly, but I found out what the Denied are after. Sonam had a staff of immense power, and in their hands, it could be a devastating weapon. They have a head start. There's no time to waste. You take Appa and Momo and gather up the rest of the team. We're gonna need some help.
So, Anaina, I know you're familiar with the show, the Nickelodeon animated show Avatar: The Last Airbender.
I am aware of the premise.
Yes. Sadly, it is not the first thing that comes up when you Google Avatar movie
No.
or Avatar in general, which is, I think, a crime, frankly. But as someone who will actually defend the Avatar films, the James Cameron ones.
Yeah.
So, to set the stage,
Yes.
you have firstly this film coming after 18 years after the original series ended, right? In
Yeah.
2008 July, so almost like exactly 18 years after the original film ended. This release date, however, was brought forward because the film was leaked in April. And when I say leaked, as in fully leaked, the entire film was just out to watch, which was very sad. Unfortunately, I'm not going to go over the details of how that happened because, it did diminish that. And after which, Paramount also removed it from having a theatrical release and released it on streaming instead. It did get a theatrical release in very, very limited theaters in like Los Angeles and like places like that. But honestly, to a point where the vast majority of the fan base could not watch it in a cinema. And also, this is coming after the live action Netflix series, which at best was okay, I would say. And a lot of people had issues with that because the original creators left the show because of creative differences and everything. So people were excited that the original creators were back for this film.
Yes.
Right. And lastly, the biggest setup, I guess, is Avatar: The Last Airbender is generally acknowledged as one of the best animated shows ever made. Full stop.
And as someone who doesn't watch animated shows or anime, I knew that.
Yeah. It has a legacy that it's built up. It's a children's show to a very much degree that explores themes of not just loss, betrayal, but also things like genocide and authoritarianism in, I would argue, really good, nuanced, and in a way that is digestible for children. Right? And I think it does that brilliantly. It is obviously inspired in an anime art style, like stuff like Hayao Miyazaki and stuff. It's not anime because it's not produced in Japan. It's a foreign made series. But again, to set the stage, this is what the film is trying to follow up to.
Yes.
A very tall order to follow.
Yes.
And I think this film is good.
Okay.
But from where the series is and everything to follow, I don't think it could have lived up to that hype. It would have been very, very hard.
Right.
And I'm going to give you my thesis statement and I'm going to come back and like show you how I proved it.
As all essays work, yes.
We are just too stuck in an academic log of like, this is how I
listen, that's how we roll. That's why we started this podcast.
Yeah, but the thing is, this feels like an episode and not a film in a way that there's not an arc that feels in a big way to be complete. And after the film ends, I am left wondering, why exactly do you think this story needed to be told instead of anything else?
Okay.
Is where I come. So I'll explain that, right? So firstly, I think we'll start with the story, right? The gang is back. Basically, Aang learns about these peoples called the Deniers, which are non-bending people who can't bend the elements, who are trying to find the staff of a long-lost avatar. And then Aang discovers, why are they trying to find the staff? Because this staff can give bending powers to people.
Okay.
He then tries to find where that staff is, finds a person frozen in ice, which is how Aang was found. So you're immediately like, is this the long-lost avatar? And turns out, no, this is another person called Taga, who's another airbender. Now, this part is very important because Aang, as the title suggests, is the last airbender. His entire civilization was wiped out. Who's this new person? And then we learn that the staff can also give airbending back to people. And that invigorates Aang. It's like, I can bring back my culture. I can bring back my people. I don't need to be the last airbender anymore. This is not something I need to carry by myself. And that's kind of where the crux of the story comes in.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to spoil everything, but I do feel the story doesn't feel like anything specific that you wouldn't have guessed from the start.
Yeah.
Then like it deals with all of that themes of like Aang being like this loss of a civilization, the trauma faced from it. His friends like again are back with the main group, which is Zuko, Katara, Sokka, and Toph.
Yes.
And them kind of helping Aang, trying to be with Aang, Katara trying to be this voice of reason, understanding, and like this idea of like they can't understand. Obviously, this big loss that he's faced, but they also see in him what makes him the avatar, what helps him rebuild everything, things like that.
Yes.
Now, my issue, like especially with the villain and everything, is the villain does relatively not very well fleshed out. He's not the best villain in the series. And the bigger issue is, having watched the follow-up series, Avatar Last Airbender, which is The Legend of Korra,
Yeah.
I'm like, this is kind of just Zahir or the traditional, I forgot what the first season villains were exactly called, but who had the same like bending, non-bending society struggle kind of plot armor. Right? And
Okay.
for the whole film, I was like, a lot of elements that it was talking about with the staff, the spirit world, bringing bending back, giving people bending.
Yes.
An airbender that's like, how do they use their powers? An airbender that may be using their powers in a more aggressive way, things like that. And I'm like, yeah, Korra did this already. Kinda.
Yeah, there's nothing new per se.
Yeah, I don't think this feels fresh relatively. Obviously, Aang didn't face this, so there's a whole other element to that, which I think is interesting to delve into.
Yeah.
But the way it's explored, the mechanics don't feel fresh, because the whole time I was just Googling, I was like, which season villain, what was his name? I was just like, this happened, right? I'm not imagining. This is already kind of like the other thing, right?
I guess what would be interesting is if, and I don't know, you can tell me, is like, if Aang deals with these same problems in the same way that the characters in the series that you're talking about deal with them.
I think that's interesting, because in Korra, you don't have Aang. Aang is dead by the point of that, because that's just how the Avatar cycle works, right?
Yeah.
So obviously you don't have that. But what you have instead is the character called Tenzin, who's the child of Aang, who's the only airbender. So he's like also tasked with this legacy of keeping airbending alive and everything to his children and everything as well. And he kind of does have a similar reaction to it. There's a whole other arc that happens in him. But it does feel like an extension of that, not say a repetition, but it feels like a supplement to it rather than a new thing or like a whole other point to be considered. Right. It's like a lot of this conversation was had. You are adding extra points to it that only Aang can react to.
It's an addition.
But if Aang was there, this story is already... the story's all... But it's also weird, right? Because this film exists in the middle of both of those things. It exists after the main series, but also before Korra. So you're kind of like, I feel some of these characters should have brought this up, shouldn't they?
Yeah, it adds to the canon of the kind of two shows by being like, Aang also dealt with this. And do you remember his son dealing with this?
I think the weird thing is his son didn't talk about it. No one mentioned it because by that point, the story wasn't written. So the character, how are the characters now?
Yeah, no accusations are being thrown here. It just feels a little bit like lazy writing.
I think, but also like what I think is just the trap of the in-between pole kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where your story does need to have some starting point. It needs to end in a way which maintains the status quo of the next series. So you kind of need to make this in-between story. But the issue is none of the impacts of the story will ever be addressed in the future because that's already in the past.
The consequences of the plot of the story cannot be that high.
Exactly. And that's, again, why this doesn't feel that important, because it feels like an episode which could have been scrunched down.
The stakes aren't that high, so why is this a movie?
The stakes are relatively very high. It's just then no one mentioned that. Nothing, status quo never changed, right? When you think of like season 1 ending where like Zuko and Iroh are on the run and like Aang's entered the Avatar state, and season 2 ending where you think Aang might be dead, and like those season ends, obviously the status quo changes, right? And I feel this should feel more like a finale episode rather than an in-between episode, because that's a movie should feel more like that, arc sense.
Yeah. It shouldn't feel like a filler episode.
Yes. So I think that's like kind of a lot of point. To be nice to it, there's a lot of fan service that I think also brings back. The Cabbage Man is back. The foaming mouth water people are back. Love them. Love to see that happening.
Yeah.
Gonna go to thing I really like, which is the art style. I think that's very well done. The battles are very fluid. They're very fun to watch. The bending's fun. Maybe not as creative as I wish it would be in places, but I think depicted really well. The backgrounds are interesting. Like visually, the film is great to look at. You can stop it, pause it in multiple places, take a screenshot. That's my wallpaper now. It's gorgeous to look at.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the like covers, and there's one with like I think it's Aang with like his hand up and like leaves in front, and it looks really gorgeous.
Yeah, gorgeous. I have no qualms about the art style. I think it's brilliant, and praises all around. Right. Also, one thing I just quickly forgot, the story, when I mentioned that, I also do want to emphasize that the writers of the film are Tim Hedrick and Christopher L. Yost. Tim Hedrick has written for the original series, so he's coming back from that. He wrote the episode. I can't remember the name of the episode, but I remember the thing we just said from the episode, which is There Is No War in Ba Sing Se. He wrote that episode.
Okay.
Amongst many others. So I think and then you have Christopher L. Yost. It's also directed by Lauren Montgomery, who's directed a lot of DC superhero films. I think I've watched almost all of them. I've enjoyed, but I do think it does kind of feel like that in a way, where it's like it's a made
Yeah.
for TV superhero kind of film where the plot wraps up very succinctly and there's no like larger consequences kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And also the writers are at this point kind of like they built this world so well that they're kind of restricted by their own bubble of how many stories they can tell.
I think that is also the case, right? So I think that brings me to the characters, right? So you have newer voice actors coming in because they've also aged up these characters.
Yes.
So you have Eric Nam plays Aang, Jessica Matten plays Katara, Roman Zaragoza plays Sokka, Steven Yeun plays Zuko,
Okay.
and Dion Kwan plays Toph, and you have Dave Bautista playing Taga, the new addition to the team.
Okay.
Right?
Interesting.
I think they're good. I do feel, I don't know, maybe this is the writing more where they're not given a lot of those really great character moments in certain places. I think especially with Toph in certain places, I feel she's not as badass as she could be. Maybe that's what I want to say. And I also kind of don't love that she's continuously complimenting Taga all the time. It just doesn't feel as character of her to do so. Like, okay, two things here, right? Hot take, firstly. Toph is often headcanoned as a lesbian or like bi or like queer in some way because of her masculine aesthetic and the way she also just typing. Do what you want. I'm not here to stop your headcanons.
Yeah.
Neither should I. That being said, hot take, it's fine for her to also just be straight. Like straight women who look like that also have the right to exist.
Yeah. There's a difference between canon and headcanon.
Yeah. And also like it's not bad to have like representation of like cis women who also like look masculine. That's fine.
Because I know so many straight masculine women. Again, it's about like let people look how they want to look.
Exactly. But I do feel the character doesn't feel as, and I think this is a point where they've just not given maybe enough to really emphasize a lot of that. Sokka still being funny, but is he as like in the same way comedic? Maybe, but I think that's I like Zuko as well, his reservedness, all of that. But again, most of Zuko's best moments were in the series because of his arc is so good. Like he has one of the best villain redemption arcs, full stop, I think.
Yeah.
And again, it's also like they've grown up, so how much of their personalities, and because you're not able to see that, what is implied. And I think the film just with a 99-minute runtime just doesn't have enough room to really explore the extended cast and really like focus on those characters.
Yeah.
I think it also it does nerf them a bit as well. Because firstly, Aang, the Avatar, Master Paul Forever, defeated the Fire Lord, the full like sun thing and everything.
Yeah.
As a child, also. His friends also are kind of master benders. They should not have trouble facing with like first time benders, even a wave alphabet. Like they just shouldn't.
Yeah.
I feel so. They do also like, and this comes to the same place where you talk about like the writers and everything have built a world and they kind of feel restricted by their own like internal rules of magic and things like that.
Yeah. So they're not as free to experiment even with the characters and their powers. And again, then you don't really know how to tell a story about a character without being like, but his powers are under threat. Does he actually have the powers that he thinks he has? Which is like a very basic...
overpowered. Superman, the same problem that often comes up. Yeah. And lastly, with the characters, I do feel there's a very distinct lack of people like Iroh, who's not even mentioned. Uncle Iroh is like one of the best characters of the show. Like, he's one of the fan favorites of the show. And I understand like he's not in this. I don't think he needs to be, but not having a passing mention even thrown to him feels missed. Then you don't have Suki or Azula, and you feel a bit lacking with the larger world. And the reason I also bring up these characters is again this idea of, is this the story that needed to be told? Because when we have so much other things to do here, there's so many other characters that the story could have focused on. Like, for example, we know Iroh dies when Korra rolls around, right?
Right.
And Zuko's very old. There's a whole story there, which is lower stakes and very emotional, can be told in a lot of ways that I think is very well explored. And like even exploring those in those ways, I think could give me something that feels more emotionally fulfilling or ties up something in the end. And I think about this in the perspective of the Breaking Bad film, El Camino.
Yeah.
Didn't come up that after, but all that film does is just focus on how Jesse gets away. It doesn't try and do it doesn't focus on what Skylar's up to or like what's Wolf's son doing. It's just about that. And that is a better, because it ties off something very specific and has an extra story to tell there.
Yeah.
Where here, it feels like it is an additional story and it does work with the characters. But I would rather something smaller because of the limitations you're in. Use the limitations you're in to suit the story instead of making the story adapt to this.
Yeah, basically try to have fun with your own story.
Like try to build within your limitation instead of
Yes.
constricting what you've built to
Yeah.
fit in there.
I think a really good way to do this, and we had this criticism of Nolan as well, is like when you get so trapped in your own bubble, you need someone from the outside to have an opinion on it.
Yeah.
And it kind of sounds like the same thing is happening here, where
Yeah, I think because again, I do think this is the story they wanted to tell. You have Brian Konietzko, Michael Dante DiMartino, and the others who are back producing this.
yeah.
So they have the foot to tell the story they want to. So it does feel a bit of like, I wish you could have just done something a bit different here instead.
Fair enough, yeah.
So yeah, I still think if you're a fan, you would enjoy this. There's a lot to love. It's still nice. I wish it was in theaters still because I think you would have had genuinely a lot of people show up.
Yeah.
Critically acclaimed the series is. That being said, I do hope there's even more stories because again, the thing I just pitched can still be told. No reason why it can't.
Of course.
And I would love to see more of this world. So yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
Those are our thoughts. Thank you for tuning in. This podcast is produced solely by us with musical assets from Pixabay. If you enjoyed this, please do share it. See you again next time.
Bye-bye.